to politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Tonight, fears of a trade war hit global markets, but Keir Starmer insists he's not going to choose between the US and the EU. The Prime Minister is right now sitting down to dinner with the 27 EU leaders in Brussels, who Donald Trump threatened with tariffs. Can he get away with not taking sides? The US President is tonight saying he's pausing tariffs on Mexico after reaching a deal, but levies on Canada and China are still due to start tomorrow. We'll be live in Washington. Also tonight, we've got first sight of an eye-catching new Sky News YouGov poll. Reform UK have come out top ahead of the Tories and Labour for the first time. We'll show you the details. We'll also hear from the government as it hits back at teaching unions furious about new plans to revamp the school inspection system in England. Plus, Downing Street's been responding to new analysis from Sky News showing small boat crossings surge on weekends. Number 10 say French officers are on patrol all week long. Scotland's First Minister accuses the UK government of hoodwinking the public over its GB energy project after the agency's boss admits to Sky a promise to employ 1,000 people could take 20 years. And we'll also be peering into the secret world of political coaching. As it emerges, Keir Starmer took acting lessons before becoming Prime Minister. All that and more with Philip Collins playing himself and James Starkie in the role of James Starkie, who'll both be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, we're starting the show tonight with the latest twist in the looming trade war. Donald Trump entered the White House and pretty much immediately said he was slapping 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada and 10% on China. And he's signalled that the EU is next in his sights, although not Britain for now, it seems. Now, Donald Trump has today paused tariffs on Mexico for 1 month after what he described as a very friendly conversation with the Mexican president. And this has led to some speculation that this is all just a negotiating tactic. But in a way, though, that misses the point. Of course, this is a negotiating tactic. It's all a big negotiation. But it's a negotiation where Donald Trump is wielding a very big stick and he's prepared to smash things up with it. The Mexico tariffs have been paused after they agreed to provide 10,000 Mexican soldiers on the border and because Donald Trump, frankly, liked the tone of what the president was saying. But if other leaders resist doing what America wants, it could be a different story when it comes to tariffs. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is reporting from Brussels.
Old allies clearly pleased to see each other in these uncertain times. Gathering to talk about European security, this informal summit was long planned, but now it has a new sense of urgency as Trump threatens leaders here in Brussels with a trade war. Into this, the British Prime Minister at NATO HQ for talks with the Defence Alliance chief.
First one in Brussels, yeah, literally got it this morning.
This grip and grasp part of a wider reset of EU-UK relations as the old post-war alliances between the US and Europe come under strain. President Trump presses for peace, this pair pressing for more allied support.
The UK is also a firm friend to Ukraine. Going forward, we must not only sustain, but continue to step up our support. So that, when the time comes, Ukraine can sit at the negotiating table in a position of strength and pursue a good deal for lasting peace.
Peace will come through strength, and we must do all that we can to support Ukraine's defence. So I'm here to work with our European partners on keeping up the pressure, targeting the energy revenues and the companies supplying his missile factories, to crush Putin's war machine.
Be it from forcing Ukraine to the negotiating table to threatening trade wars with allies, isn't it the truth that President Trump is a bad thing for Europe's economic prosperity and security?
On the question, firstly, of tariffs, obviously it's early days. I do think it's right for us to acknowledge the role that the US have played in relation to the joint effort on Ukraine. And that's, of course, pivotal because it's not just a question of a war or the sovereignty of Ukraine. It is not just a European issue. It's a question of global security. And one thing that's come out of the awful conflict in Ukraine is actually a stronger and bigger NATO, which I think is really important.
The Prime Minister's going straight from here to an EU dinner with 27 fellow leaders. A British Prime Minister hasn't done such a thing since Brexit, so the symbolism of it all is clear. He wants to reset relations, but all of it is overshadowed by growing tensions between Brussels and Washington. And what that means for London, well, that's really unclear. Keir Starmer hopes he can forge closer trading and security ties with Europe after a bumpy Brexit, while still keeping President Trump on side. The Prime Minister insists he won't pick between the UK's closest allies, but that could prove much easier said than done. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Brussels.
Well, everyone is trying to work out what a trade war would actually mean. Higher prices for consumers, potential chaos for businesses. Here's our data and economics editor, Ed Conway.
Let me start with a slightly provocative question. What if the UK has almost unwittingly found itself in about the best position it could be vis-à-vis Donald Trump and his tariffs, and done it basically by mistake? That sounds like slightly strange, but let me just talk you through it. And the first thing you really need to know about this is that if there's one thing Donald Trump really hates, it is trade deficits. What's a deficit? It's when your imports are much bigger than your exports. And that's certainly the case for the United States. There you can see the imports, they are much bigger than the exports. And as a result, there is that deficit. And if you break it down, so look at where are those goods actually coming from or indeed going to, look, when it comes to imports, the majority of them, pretty much half actually, when you look at this, nearly half, come from Canada, Mexico and China. So no surprises as to whether those were the countries which we're focused on. But here's what's interesting, OK? So now look at other countries and their deficits with the US. These bars are showing you how much the deficits are with the US. Anything in this kind of pink territory means the US does have a deficit with them. So look, there's China, there's the EU, there's Mexico, and Canada is somewhere there as well. Anything in the blue means there is no deficit with the US. And these are the countries that Donald Trump is really focusing on. And here's why this matters for the UK. First of all, obviously, as we all know, the UK is no longer part of the EU. So if there were to be tariffs on the EU, that wouldn't directly affect the UK. Secondly, well, look where the UK is. It's over here. And there is, at least according to the US figures, there is no deficit with the UK. Worth saying, though, OK, so those are the US figures. If you look at the UK's kind of same version of the same statistic, actually the UK bar is a little bit further down. And in fact, it's slightly in that negative territory. But even so, it's relatively small. So Donald Trump won't be looking at the UK and saying, gosh, that deficit is too big. The other reason why the UK might well be in this good position is that while other countries around the world, including the US, Canada, India, Turkey, many other countries have already imposed extra tariffs on China, the UK so far has not. These are tariffs on electric vehicles. And so in the event of a trade negotiation, the UK could just say, look, maybe we'll actually impose those tariffs. So for all of those reasons, actually, Britain isn't in that bad a position to do a deal potentially with the US, to negotiate, or maybe to be that bridge with Europe. But of course, with Donald Trump, you really just never know.
Well, let's talk about this a bit further, shall we? Our US correspondent James Matthews is in Washington. But first, let's go to Brussels, and our political Beth Rigby is there. It's been a bit of a tight walk for Keir Starmer to walk today. What's been happening?
Well, he came to Brussels wanting to talk about a UK-EU security pact, come into NATO to talk up support for Ukraine, to impress that upon other leaders. And then he is tonight going to this summit dinner, an informal dinner with 27 other EU leaders. It's the first time since 2020 a UK Prime Minister has done that. And the aim of that was about forging closer security and trade ties with the European Union again after a rather bumpy Brexit. But of course, it's all been massively overshadowed by events over the weekend with Trump threatening those tariffs on Mexico now paused, and then Canada and China, which as it stands at the moment are coming into effect tomorrow. But it's not just that. It's also Trump threatening tariffs on the European Union, saying it's an atrocity that they are coming down the tracks, unhappy about that huge trade deficit, and also suggesting that he might take action against the UK, but then saying he thinks he could work it out. And you've got a Prime Minister here in the EU, and what he's seeing is tensions between the two closest allies of the UK, the European Union, and the US, and he is trying to walk that tightrope between them. He said at the press conference earlier that he doesn't think he has to choose between the US or the European Union, but at the moment it does seem that Keir Starmer is getting slightly warmer treatment from President Trump than the European Union. Of course, President Trump was a fan of Brexit. Keir Starmer seems to have had a good relationship with him to date. Indeed, one senior figure I was speaking to back in London said they were almost surprised at how warm Donald Trump appears to be to the UK Prime Minister. Look, In the coming weeks, he wants to go to Washington to forge closer ties with President Trump to talk about security, Ukraine, trade ties. And he's also here at the moment in Brussels trying to do the same thing. The big question is, can the Prime Minister keep riding these two horses? As Ed said in his report, the issue for him is Trump is very unpredictable, and will he get the choice?
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there in Brussels. Well, before we bring in James Matthews, I just want to hear from President Trump himself. He's been speaking in the last hour.
We haven't agreed on tariffs yet, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. But we have a very good relationship. I also spoke with Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, and we had a good talk in the morning, but I did ask him a couple of questions, like, you know, banks aren't allowed to do business in Canada. Canada is very tough. Canada is very, you know, we're not treated well by Canada.
Right, let's go to Washington and bring in James Matthews, shall we? James, what do you make of the latest in the kind of, I mean, it's not a trade war yet, is it, the kind of tariff posturing?
Yeah, it is central to the Trump agenda, an agenda which, you know, has caused consternation, clearly, in Mexico, in Canada. I'm actually outside the headquarters of USAID, the Agency for International Development, Sophie. And you see a crowd behind me. That's a crowd protesting at plans for USAID. We'll come to that in a minute. But in terms of tariffs, there have been changes within the past few hours. Tariffs have been paused on Mexico. That 25% blanket tariff, that's been paused after talks with the Mexican president, who has agreed to send 10,000 troops to the southern border. Donald Trump says that will be to prevent access for migrants and to stop the trade in fentanyl. In terms of Canada, well, that hasn't budged yet. There have been discussions, as you heard there. Donald Trump talking tough to that trading partner and neighbour. There'll be further talks with Justin Trudeau this afternoon. But it's a serious business in terms of the politics and the economics, particularly for Canada, given the trade that they do with the United States. 3/4 of its exports come south. That compares with a quarter going from the States towards Canada. A soft target, perhaps, for Donald Trump. But I suppose China really is at the heart of all of this. They have, I suppose, struck a holding position, complaining to the World Trade Organization for now. But their reaction in full, we have yet to see. There is perhaps political dexterity on the part of Donald Trump in not singling out China, which is the big adversary and the big target on a number of levels, not just economic, but to choreograph this move, roping in the soft targets of Canada, Mexico alongside China. Perhaps there is a value in not antagonizing Beijing and pursuing a path towards a peaceful resolution on tariffs and robust engagement beyond that.
It's an interesting lens to look at it through, that actually this is all about that dominant relationship with China. James, you said that there are protesters around you. Just explain what's going on.
Yes, Sophie, I'm outside this building in the centre of Washington, D.C. Behind me are a number of protesters. Amongst them are employees of this place, USAID. They were told in an email yesterday, don't turn up for work today, on Monday morning. This place is going to be shut down, according to Elon Musk, who, of course, is in charge of Doge, the unelected political ally of Donald Trump. This is his brief and his way of cutting back on layers of bureaucracy as he would have it. I have to say, he did it in an untypical fashion, tweeting last night or putting on X. He said this: "We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. Could gone to some great parties, did that instead." And what he's done effectively is to shut down this humanitarian aid arm of the United States government. Opponents say it is absolutely the wrong move because of the value of not just of humanitarian aid and what that does for countries abroad in need. But it's also a very strong aspect of soft diplomacy on the part of the United States, winning friends around the world and also keeping an eye on enemies. They're objecting, and I have to say, Sophie, there's been much discussion here about street protest. You know, given the radical change that's happened in such a short space of time, I have heard much discussion about, you know, where are the politicians, where are the people who object to this, and what are they doing to articulate that? This is the first kind of gathering of its sort that I've seen, and I suppose a front line of sorts in the fight against radical revolutionary change. We'll see how this evolves and how this develops alongside government policy. I suspect that all this might end up in the courts, actually, and that will be a challenge, a test of the strengths of the courts to deal with what is radical change, and also many here would rightly argue is unconstitutional change, because this place, along with other similar agencies of government, were constituted, authorised, are funded by Congress. This place was set up by President Kennedy in 1961. The point being made here amongst these employees is that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, whichever individual, can't simply do this off their own bat. It has to be a political, legally sound decision that chimes with the will of the people. In other words, it has to go through Congress. It has not thus far.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Now back to the UK, because we've got a brand new poll to bring you tonight on the Politics Hub, just breaking the last few moments. And of course, look, don't pay too much attention to just one poll, but it's a pretty eye-catching one. And it's also part of a wider trend. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has the details. What's going on?
So the opinion poll that we've got is one that's absolutely guaranteed to drive the conversation. Small changes underlie it, but that doesn't mean it won't be big news. Let me take you through the latest YouGov Sky News exclusive poll, because what it does, Sophie, is it puts Reform UK in the lead. Only by a little bit and only after a small change, but Reform UK in the latest voting intention poll are on 25%, overtaking Labour, who were top, who are on 24%. The Tories down in third on 21%. Liberal Democrats on 14 and Green on 9. Now, I said quite small movements. What's happened to get Nigel Farage's party out in front is that since last week, Reform have gone up 2 and Labour down 3. That's the big change. Those are in the margin of error. So it doesn't suggest necessarily a massive shift. But when you see Reform UK coming out on top, there's no way the political system is going to respond and talk about that.
And I guess, in a way, if it was a massive shift, then that would think, oh, this is an outlier. You know, it doesn't really make sense. But the fact that, you know, it feels to me like we've been building to this point over a period of some weeks now.
I think this moment was a bit inevitable, because the real shift that we're seeing, which you can see over a longer time period, is this, that we've entered, in voting intention, in opinion poll terms, into a period of three-party politics. You can see actually what's going on is that those numbers are pretty close together. Now, at the moment, that's quite good for Keir Starmer, because it means that 2 of his opponents are split. That is driving a conversation between people in this party and people in this party, whether they couldn't join forces. Imagine if those 2 numbers, 21% and 25%, could be added together. Some people in the Tory party, like Kemi Badenoch, said no way. Nigel Farage doesn't appear convinced about that at the moment, but it's the conversation going on in the background.
Can you talk to me about Labour's numbers as well? Because, look, they're on 24% now. I mean, how much has Labour fallen since entering government?
I think at the general election, you had Labour in the... Well, I mean, effectively, it was in the low 30s to generate an extraordinary majority, up in the 160 in terms of the majority that they got in the House of Commons. Now, that has dropped right down. Yeah. It is a government. It is doing unpopular things. That is not hugely surprising, and there are up to 4.5 years until the next election. But I've gone through all the data behind this great big opinion poll, and there are other changes as well. Actually, what's happened, one really interesting switch this week, is that for the first time, Nigel Farage is more popular, or if I'm being accurate, less unpopular than Kemi Badenoch, but both of them are more popular, less unpopular than Keir Starmer. It looks as if Labour have a massive rebuilding challenge to do. They say, well, you do the difficult things at the start of a parliament. There's a big journey left to go, but it isn't straightforward.
No, it really isn't. Sam, thank you very much. As you say, this is going to be talked about an awful lot, including, I'm sure, in tomorrow's newspapers as well. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Sam Shah. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The columnist and journalist Philip Collins, who also served as Tony Blair's chief speechwriter, and the former Home Office Special Advisor James Starkie. Great to have you both on the programme. I'm keen to talk about tariffs, about all those. Any reaction either of you want to give to the poll? Do you think we should ignore it? Do you think it is actually a force to be reckoned with?
No, you can't ignore it. You can't ignore it for the reason you gave, which is that this is part of a trend, and anybody who's in neither of the two main parties has to take this very seriously. So ignoring it will be really foolish. I think that there's a lot in it. For the 45% that you add Labour and the Tories together, less than either party got in 1951. The fragmentation of British politics, because actually the Greens and the Liberal Democrats are 23% between them as well. So they're scattering to the winds, and how that maps onto an electoral map is anybody's guess.
Talk of a deal. Can you see that happening? Reform with the Conservatives?
I mean, the interesting thing, me and Philip were talking about it off air, is Farage's attraction is that he's not a mainstream politician. So there's an interesting question, which is, one, does Farage reform have a ceiling? A lot of people have always felt they did. We'll see in the next couple of years. And two, if you're going to start talking about a deal, and if Nigel Farage or Reform start doing a deal with a very, one of the oldest political parties in the world, do they suddenly just seem like the politics of old? Which is the attraction of Farage to those voters is that he's not. He's an outsider. He's a renegade. So if he starts doing deals, does he lose that?
I agree with that. I think Farage is just about to take on a job he's never had before in his life, which is to be a politician. Because you can get to 25%, and remember, he's only at 25%, by being really candid and forthright on things. Can you get to 35%? The next 10% of voters that you have to win over are really quite different. I'm not sure.
It's very interesting, and the different scrutiny that comes with that and all that kind of thing as well. Let's talk about Keir Starmer, shall we? He's in Brussels today. He's the first Prime Minister to be sitting down with EU leaders since Brexit, in that way. Obviously, the economy is going to be so important. That relationship with the EU, so important, seeing what's happening in the US as well. How do you think he should play it, James?
Well, I think, if you look at the different bits of news today, it's interesting because it does appear that maybe he does have a chance to play a kind of role between the EU and the US. Trump is kind of speaking quite positively of him, and he's over there for this first dinner. But that also, that's going to be tricky because, if he wants to kind of look to America, and Trump's going to want something out of him, some kind of deal. And then he's off trying to do that with the EU. I think the EU, the obvious area that he needs to be careful, and we've seen talk of the youth mobility scheme, is migration. I think, the concerns people have about trade is, does it restrict us, what we can do with the rest of the world, etc. But at the base point, the idea of doing more trade with someone else, whether that's the EU or not, I don't think is unpopular and will damage him massively in the polls. Anything on migration that in 4 years the other parties, Reform and the Tories, can point to and say, well, it's gone up because you did with the EU, I think that's toxic.
What would you be advising him to do here?
Well, I think pretty much what he's doing, actually. I think he's handling it quite deftly at the moment. I mean, who would have thought that his relations with President Trump will be written up as really good early on? I mean, of course, they can go awry, but he's done very well to start. And I think there is a moment for him with the European Union, which is very much along the lines Jane says, which is there are opportunities for trade. And I think he's very clear on that anything that even suggests or hints going back towards the European Union is completely ruled out. But that leaves you actually quite a lot of scope for deals on trade and sector deals. And I think there's something sensible to be done there, because there's part of, if really, internally, privately, any of the Labour people thinking growth is our primary mission, they believe that a closer relationship with the European Union is part of that.
Do you think that, the Lib Dems will say you should be, having customs union. Do you think there are people around Keir Starmer who are saying, look, come on, you know, let's just go for it, growth is a priority?
Not quite as cavalier as that, but there are people thinking, is it feasible that we could do that? I think the primary question is, whatever you do, is it clear that this is not a reneging upon the exit from the European Union? Does it look separate from that? And if it does, the answer is yes. And if it doesn't, then the answer is absolutely no. Now, where does a customs union lie? I'm not sure. It's a risk. They've been very, very risk-averse on this question until now.
Are they right to be risk-averse when it comes to, you know, Brexit?
Yes, I think bluntly they are, especially with, you know, Reformer going to go hard after Labour voters. And I think it's not just, I don't think it's the betrayal argument specifically. It's something that's seen as kind of damaging, binding themselves into something damaging because they're ideologically pro-EU. And I think that's the thing that the Prime Minister Starmer needs to be careful of. I mean, I think anything that they can present as beneficial on trade, frankly, growth, if you speak to the public, anything... You know, in opinion polls or focus groups, anything they think can genuinely deliver growth, I don't think there's a problem with that.
Interesting. Thanks both very much indeed. Now, one of the key issues for the Prime Minister in Brussels is how to stop migrants coming across the Channel in small boats. It's on his agenda for his dinner tonight, and New Sky News analysis has found a pattern when people are making the journey, with the number of crossings going up at weekends. Well, Downing Street responded to our findings earlier, insisting the money it gives to the French is being used effectively and that 28,000 dangerous crossings were stopped last year. But let's hear now from our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, who's been going through the data.
We've talked a lot about high numbers of Channel crossings, but should we just remind ourselves of what those numbers have actually been the last few years? Because you'll remember 2022, this was a record year. More than 45,000 people crossing the Channel in small boats. Last number, really high figure as well, nearly 37,000. But what we've been looking at is why are more people crossing the Channel on weekend days? Have a look at this. In 2022, 32% of all Channel crossings on weekend, 36% the following year. And last year, it was 40%. It should be 28%. Why are we seeing more people crossing the Channel on the weekends? This is another way of showing it. Look here, this is where the average should be in terms of the number of people crossing per day. And look, on the weekends, way more than where that average line is. So why is this happening? Well, I've spoken to quite a few people. A few theories have been put to me. One is this about resourcing on the French side? This was a former immigration minister. They say it's frustrating that we were paying the French but weren't able to specify operational deployments. It would not surprise me if the French had fewer people at the weekend, and the people smugglers have come to realise that. Also spoke to a former senior official in the Home Office with responsibility for borders. They said strategically it suits France to have the gust with us, but they said there would probably be hundreds, thousands of people patrolling the French beaches. Very difficult to prove. I put this to the French side. Unsurprisingly, a bit of a backlash. Here's the Calais MP.
It's an easy way for the politicians to blame the other side of the Channel, on both sides, actually. But it's not very brave, because it's a bit coward to say that it's the other side's fault. The guys underground are working very hard during the week, during the weekends.
There is another theory. This could be basically logistics, about smuggler planning, because they're operating not just in Calais. This is a complex operation well beyond France. And as one source on the French side told me, they're relying sometimes on people to do smaller jobs like transporting boats, and perhaps those people have weekday jobs, which makes it easier to launch on the weekends. Another potential reason that was put to me is that often boats launch from what are called inland waterways, and those inland waterways are full of fishing boats on weekdays. So is it that that's the reason why they need to launch on a weekend? It could be something a little bit more logistical like that. And the last reason is this. Could there be a weather coincidence? This is leaked from the Home Office for 2024. And look at this. These are days over here in the dark that are highly likely to be a Channel crossing. Down here, those days were much more likely last year to be on a weekend. It is very hard to know for sure, but those are some of the options as to why we're seeing a surge in the number of Channel crossings on Saturdays and Sundays.
Ali Fortescue there. Now, the boss of GB Energy has told Sky News it could take 20 years to deliver a Labour government pledge of 1,000 jobs for Aberdeen and decades to cut bills by £300, as Keir Starmer also promised. He sat down with Conor Gillies for his first broadcast interview.
In this city, they know change is coming. Once Europe's oil capital, Aberdeen is a place pivoting, now home to GB Energy, the government's flagship green idea.
Never heard of it. Oh, yeah, no, sorry, the new government agency, yes.
I haven't heard anything about that, mate, sorry.
It's a good thing it's coming, but it's overhyped and it'll never deliver what the government said.
It's a good thing. It's better than not coming. And we are supposed to be the oil capital.
And that is why it's here. GB Energy won't supply electricity to consumers, instead owning and managing renewable energy projects. The government trying to lure investors to join in. This big pitch from Labour has been mired in confusion. There are promises to save tens of billions of pounds for households, to slash energy bills and create thousands of jobs. But there are questions here in a nervous Aberdeen about what delivery looks like.
Nice to meet you. I'm Connor from Sky News.
And with 1,000 GB Energy jobs pledged, here is the man tasked with making it happen. In this, his first TV interview.
Great British Energy itself is going to create, over the next 5 years, 200 or 300 jobs in Aberdeen. That will be the size of our team. But look, that is...
They were promised 1,000.
Look, and I said, in the very long term, as we become a major energy champion, it may be many more than that.
What's the very long term?
Well, look, we grow these companies. Energy companies grow over 10, 20 years, and we're going to be around in 20 years as a British energy champion.
So it could take 20 years to get 1,000 jobs?
Look, but the issue that you're completely missing here is the thousands of jobs that are being created in the supply chain.
Off the Aberdeen coast, a glimpse of a transition already underway, as business bosses question the pace of this new project.
200,000 people in the UK are employed in the energy sector. About a quarter of those are just in this region alone. What we have got visibility of is probably not as much progress as anybody would have liked. I think we're really looking over the next few months for that to be delivered on.
If you look at how many jobs we think are going to go, particularly in the North East, you know, if GB Energy does not pick up the pace and start to, you know, move workers in there and start to create proper green jobs, then I'm afraid we could be looking at a desolation of the North East.
But these are early days. Billions of pounds of public money is being pumped in. Yet the boss cannot say when consumer energy bills will finally come down. Conor Gillies, Sky News, Aberdeen.
Just want to take to Brussels because Keir Starmer's just been speaking to the cameras on his way to that dinner with EU leaders tonight. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Yeah, you're just going to stand here and hold your folder back in. Hello. Great. Ready? Happy? Perfect.
Yeah, joining the EU Council meeting this evening is really important for the United Kingdom because obviously it's about defence and security, which is central and vital to UK's concerns and interests. So it's very important to be here at this Council meeting this evening, representing the United Kingdom on such an important issue. Obviously, there's a wider question of the reset between the EU and the UK, where we want to make progress, but starting with defence and security this evening is very, very important for our interests.
How important is the reset in the EU to getting the economy going again? And can this reset be meaningful until you rejoin the EU or the customs union?
On the question of rejoining the EU, that isn't going to happen. That question was answered when we had a referendum in the UK some years ago. So that's settled. But I do think that we can have a better, closer relationship when it comes to trade and security. I'll be discussing this evening on questions of energy and on trade and the economy. And I think that's in the UK's interest, and I believe it's in the EU's interests as well.
If there is a ceasefire deal in Ukraine, do you envisage Britain sending troops as peacekeepers there?
So far as Ukraine is concerned, it's really important that we keep our resolve in support of Ukraine. And that means we must continue to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, whether that's supply of capability, whether that's training, whether that's financing. That support is vitally, vitally important. And any discussion about security guarantees is secondary to that question of putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position. And that's amongst the points that I'll be making this evening.
Would the UK be prepared to do that?
Well, the question at the moment is putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position, because we don't know what the future holds. What we do know is that whatever happens next or in the coming months, it is important for Ukraine to be in the strongest possible position.
And last question, what's your response to the fatal stabbing in the school in Sheffield?
The terrible stabbing in Sheffield is one where I think the whole country would want to reach out to the family, to the friends, to the school, the entire community in their grief and mourn with them. Obviously there'll be an investigation, but I think at this point I simply speak for the country on behalf to the individuals affected, to the family in particular, but everybody impacted by this awful situation. A young boy has gone to school and hasn't returned home, and so my first thoughts as Prime Minister and as a father are with the family. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Keir Starmer speaking there in Brussels. Let's talk education now, because there's been a big change to how Ofsted will report on schools in England, with single word judgments to be scrapped. Here's our education reporter, Anjum Pirbakos.
The new government pledged that improving schools would be a priority, breaking down the barriers to opportunity, raising standards across the country. And they'll want changes to Ofsted to be a major step towards that. Ofsted previously graded schools using a simpler system, as outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. The new format will grade schools in 8 areas, from achievement to curriculum to attendance, using a colour-coded 5-step scale from causing concern to exemplary. Single-phrase grades were scrapped after the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023, after an Ofsted inspection downgraded her school from outstanding to inadequate. The coroner found the inspection contributed to her death. Some teachers are concerned lessons haven't been learned.
I don't see anything that I've read this morning that is going to reduce stress, reduce workload or reduce pressure. To jump from single word judgments to just different single word judgments across a whole different range of categories, I think is not a step in the right direction.
We've spoken to teachers who say that the big listen has not resulted in Ofsted listening at all, and actually they've lost faith in the system. Ruth Perry's sister has said that this system and this proposal is a dangerous rehash of what was previously in existence, which resulted in the tragic death of her sister. What are you really good at?
For the Education Secretary, the changes are key to driving up teaching standards.
I just fundamentally reject this idea that somehow providing more information, shining a light on areas where there is a need for improvement, but also where there is excellence, is somehow not something that parents want, when all the evidence is clear that they do.
Parents we spoke to said they liked the detail.
I think they're quite good. It's anything that provides more information. Sometimes the Ofsted reports previously were either overwhelming or just reductive.
As a parent, it breaks it down a lot easier. Teachers know what they're looking for when they're looking at it, and other teaching professionals. But if a parent's point of view, you might not know how to break it down and what the areas are.
Now, the start of a 12-week consultation period, as teachers, parents and politicians work out whether the proposed changes will get the right results. Anjum Pirbakos, Sky News.
Well, for more on this, I spoke to the Education Minister, Stephen Morgan. Thank you very much for being on the programme. So you are announcing some changes to the way that Ofsted reports on schools. What's the idea?
We want to break down the barriers to opportunity for every child, and obviously our plan for change sets out the direction of travel we want to take. We've ushered in a new era on high and rising standards in every school, and what we want to do is make sure that parents get really good, rich information around the journey that the school's on to improve. So where it's doing well and the areas that it wants to improve. And
so just to, because I got all that. That's the kind of press release. That's the lines to take. What are you actually doing? What are you doing?
So Ofsted are consulting on what the report card will look like, with a series of measures that it'd be putting in place to basically give parents much richer information on where a school is at in the journey that it's on to improve. I want to make sure that every child goes to a great local school. I want to make sure that parents have got good quality information around the core offer that school will offer, and the report cards will help achieve that.
So the teaching unions aren't happy, I think it's fair to say. The head teachers union, the ASCL, for example, said that the report cards appear to be even worse than the single-word judgments that were criticised before. What's your response to that?
I want to make sure that every child goes to a great local school and there's high and rising standards in every school, and the investment and the reform that we are bringing will help achieve that. Of course, we want to hear from the sector. Of course, we want to consult and engage on what our proposals will do. But I want to make sure that parents have got access to really good quality information, so when they make a choice around where they send their school, they know they're making the right choice, and that's fundamental to what we're doing.
You say that it's good to hear from the sector. Does a part of you think the unions were moaning before about the single-word judgments, now they're moaning again because the judgments are too complicated? These guys are never going to be happy.
It's really important that we listen to all stakeholders. You know, my focus is on listening to what parents tell me they want to see in an education system.
So you're listening more to the parents than the unions, is that fair?
Well, I visit schools every week, Sophie, and I hear what teachers tell me, I hear what school support staff tell me, and what they tell me is that they want a government that breaks the link between background and opportunity, and that's exactly what we're doing with our plan for change.
Look, sorry, we've got a lot of plan for change, a lot about breaking down barriers, but we're talking about the Ofsted report cards here, right? So just to get really clear, you know, the teachers are saying it's too much, they don't like it. Parents telling you that actually they do want more information, so the unions are just going to have to suck it up.
Well, they do want more information, they want richer information. When I was a school governor, Sophie, I would read a school report and didn't think it told me very much around where the school was at. And actually, we want to make sure that there's a push for partnership and to make sure that there's excellence in every single school. And I think the report cards are a key part in making that happen.
There's obviously a bit of a recruitment issue going on with teachers. I'm sure it's something that you're very aware of as well. Are you worried that putting more pressure on teachers could lead to more people leaving the profession?
See, more broadly, our wider reforms obviously will make a real difference to the teacher recruitment and retention crisis that we've seen. Obviously, we increased teacher pay last year by 5.5%. There's lots of things in the Children's Wellbeing Bill that will hopefully improve the wellbeing of teachers. I want to see more flexible working in schools. I want to learn from the best in the education system to make sure that teachers are supported to do the vital job that they do, to make sure that every child succeeds and thrives.
So you think that you're not worried about Ofsted putting pressure on teachers and making them leave the profession?
I mean, I've heard the pressure that Ofsted has on schools and school leaders, and that's why, obviously, we're committed to reforming. But obviously, Ofsted have a consultation that they are going to be running in due course. It's really important that teachers and school support staff up and down the country feed into that consultation.
I just want to talk a little bit about wider issues now, because Keir Starmer is obviously in Brussels today. He's the first UK Prime Minister to join a meeting of EU leaders since Brexit. What impact has Brexit had on the UK economy?
I think it's really important that Keir is in Brussels, you know, working really closely with our allies around what that relationship looks like for the future. And obviously the security and growth of our economy is absolutely vital, working alongside the EU. In my own brief, I have got responsibilities around AI, and I think one of the benefits of Brexit has been some of the new freedoms because of regulations being removed on AI, and I think that's a really exciting programme for this government to be getting on and delivering.
Because the question was about the impact of Brexit on the UK economy. You know, since 2016, foreign investment fallen by 37%, immigration from outside the EU up 600,000, growth, productivity flatlining effectively. And what impact would you say it's had on the economy?
Well, I think it's, in some respects, early days, but I think it's really important that we do work alongside our
like 8 years ago. That's quite a long time,
partners.
isn't it?
Well, 5 years ago since the deal obviously came in, but you know, lots of things that we can be doing with our EU partners in terms of our mission to drive growth in our economy and put money back in people's pockets.
Do you think that we are more reliant on the EU with President Trump in the White House?
Well, I think the Prime Minister set out earlier today that it's really important we have a good relationship with the EU and with the US. The US is obviously a very well-established trading partner of ours. We want to make sure we continue on those shared priorities around security and growth and make sure we deliver more money in people's pockets. So I think it's not one or other. It's about a relationship with both entities to make sure we get the best for the British people.
I mean, if that US relationship was so important, it's a bit of a weird decision, was it, to appoint a US ambassador who described the president as a danger to the world?
I think
it's an interesting tactic.
Well, I think Peter Mandelson did a very good job as ambassador to the US. I think and that relationship with the US is so vital. Historic trading
He doesn't
partners.
think he's a danger to the world anymore, then?
Well, Peter set out his stall, and we're really close working together is absolutely key for that relationship between the UK and the US.
Okay. There's been some really awful news today with a 15-year-old stabbed at a school in Sheffield. What's your reaction? I'm sure, the details are still coming out. I know you're probably limited in what you can say, but what is your reaction to that?
Obviously, tragic incident in Sheffield this afternoon, and my thoughts with the victim, that the family and his loved ones. Schools should be places for protection, and it's absolutely important that the local authority, the school, and the police work together to make sure that remains the case. But I mean, obviously, I can't cut across a live police investigation that South Yorkshire Police obviously launched. But my thoughts are with the family at this very, very difficult time.
There's been a wider debate about stabbings, and Idris Elba, the actor, recently was saying that maybe we should even look at rounded kitchen knives, so knives that are still sharp but don't have that point on the end. And I've been thinking about this a bit because when you use the point, you don't tend to use the point in your cooking that much. And by far the most common murder weapon in the UK is a kitchen knife. Is that something you think should be looked at?
Obviously, in our manifesto, we set out plans to halve the number of knife crime in society over the next 10 years. When I was first elected to Parliament, Sophie, I was on the offensive weapons bill, and we discussed some of these issues. I've been disappointed by the lack of progress that we've seen since my time in Parliament, and I'm really pleased that the government are taking this really seriously, and we're setting out more measures in due course around age verification and indeed around what can be sold online. I think those are the right steps to take to stop tragic instances like this.
So I guess, we hear about these really shocking cases of zombie knives, for example, or guns, but actually the kitchen knife is by far something, as you will know with your work, something that people use far more to devastating impact. I mean, what about this idea with the sharpness of the knife?
I mean, obviously that's a question for the Home Secretary. I don't want to cut across what Yvette Cooper will be doing, but I think it's really important that we learn lessons from the past to make sure that we have tough legislation in place to avoid instances like this ever again.
OK, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, let's bring in our duo again, shall we? Philip Collins and James Starkie. Great to have you both with us. Well, look, the interview was predominantly around education, and we've got these big changes for Ofsted coming through. It's always a very controversial issue, right? Feelings run high in the unions and among teachers when it comes to Ofsted. What's your take on this, Philip?
Well, I'm reasonably encouraged, actually, by the reforms because I've been a little concerned about Labour's education policy. I regard education policy over 40 years as a success story in Britain across the two parties and the coalition, and the early signs were the Labour government might start to undo some of those things. But this actually, I mean, I don't want to pick a fight with the teaching unions just for the sake of it, but as you put to Stephen Morgan, they do tend to be against everything. And so it's not so bad politically for Bridget Phillipson to be standing up to union opposition on something where I think there's a richer range of information. So I was quite encouraged by what came through today.
What's your take?
I mean, I don't think there's a problem having a row with the unions per se. As Philip says, I don't think this can damage with the public. I mean, on the wider reforms, I do think, frankly, it's quite crazy to pick something that's had cross-party consensus. Not the Ofsted reforms, say, but the wider education reforms that Bridget Phillipson is looking to bring in.
Are you talking about the academy and free schools in particular?
To take something that's had cross-party consensus for near on 30 years. When Labour came in 6 months ago, the public weren't, the public broadly think the education system has improved and is doing well. And to start to dismantle that, I think is, I just cannot understand why you would do that, either policy-wise or politically. And if you're wrong on both, you're definitely wrong. On the Ofsted reforms, clearly they felt they needed to do something. As I was watching that as a parent and thinking, could I understand that? Maybe I'm not,
come on,
complex.
James. It's not that complex.
But the one-word things were quite easy.
I think you can cope with 8 words.
I think I can cope with 8 words.
It's got colour chart as well, if you're really stuck.
I'm not sure my GCSE English teacher would agree, but I probably just can manage 8 words.
OK, that's good. I get the sense that you agree with what James is saying on academies and free schools?
Yes, I do. I do think that was a very important set of reforms to the credit of both governments at different times. And I'm not certain that they are going to dismantle it. I don't think that's what they think they're doing, but I do worry that some of the clauses in the schools bill have the effect of reducing the autonomy of schools. And the autonomy of head teachers to act and to run their schools has been a very important part in what has been a really significant improvement in British state schools. Really significant. So anything that undermines that, I would worry about.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been talking about the improvement in schools. I've always thought, do you think there was a bit of a mistake for the Conservatives to not make more of a deal of this in your campaigning?
I don't think the Conservatives shouted enough about the success that we had on education. And it was obviously cross-party, and it was something that was started under New Labour. But I think, you know, particularly my former boss, Michael Gove, and I don't think there was enough made in the past few years of what an improvement has been made, you know, in the education system, in school standards. If you look at the across reading and maths, where we are in the world, it really is a noticeable increase.
I was really surprised by that. I mean, as a government, you'd run on your record, and you know, it wasn't my job to do their campaign for them, but I would have run very hard on that. And there were other things too, where you could say, all governments claim the benefits of what happened on their watch. I would have run really hard on it, and they barely ever did. I mean, Michael Gove actually was one of the people pushing them to do precisely that, and the education reforms would have been the centrepiece of it.
OK. Still to come on the Politics Hub. In politics, sometimes it's not just about what you say, but the way you say it. We'll discuss the art of mastering the perfect political speech after the break.
Coming up on the UK Tonight from 8, we'll be live in Sheffield, where a 15-year-old boy has been stabbed to death at school. Another boy, also 15, is in custody tonight. Also coming up, the Parkinson's patient who says he feels cured thanks to a groundbreaking new treatment. And I'll be speaking to the pub landlady who scored an own goal with a free drinks promotion at the weekend. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8. Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Is it a draw? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children? Great to see you. Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran? No. Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing. As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else. It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Do you think, James, that the Conservative Party, the Conservative Party, is going to be able to hold on to the Hello, welcome back. Well, apparently Keir Starmer hired a voice coach back in 2020 when he was opposition leader. Two Sunday Times journalists say in their new book, Get In, that the Labour leader hired the actor Leonie Mellinger to help improve his speaking style. Well, let's see whether he's put it into practice. Here he is back in 2018.
We're talking this afternoon, as Jenny has just said, about Brexit. That seems to be all I ever talk about these days. But we have to remember with Brexit that quite often we get bogged down in the technicalities.
Let's chat to Phil and James again, shall we? I mean, look, we joke, but actually this is, I guess, quite common, right, among political leaders? What do you think?
It's very common. I mean, the famous example, of course, was Margaret Thatcher, who lowered her voice with very considerable coaching, and quite right, too. You're in public, you're speaking, it's a major part, you get your message over. Try and be as good as you can be.
What do you reckon?
It's true. I mean, I always find the biggest thing with politicians is that actually it comes down to confidence. Most of them are fairly good speakers anyway. They kind of hopefully know what they want to say.
Most of them are good speakers, do you think?
Yeah,
I reckon.
Compared to you,
it's very generous.
I mean, the people I worked for, they were exemplary speakers.
Of course, yeah. No voice coaching needed,
no
right?
No voice coaching.
OK, cool. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. And then at 9 p.m, we've got The World with Yalda Hickey. But I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m.